Decisions made by the Secretary of State on media mergers under the Enterprise Act 2002 are made on a quasi-judicial basis. I want to be very clear about what that means. When taking a quasi-judicial decision, I am tightly bound. I must take my decision only on the basis of the evidence that is relevant to the specified public interests. My decision cannot be based on opinion, speculation or conjecture. Any decision I take must be objectively justified by the facts before me. I must set aside wider political considerations going beyond the scope of the legislation. I must act independently and follow a process that is scrupulously fair and impartial, and this is what I am doing. On the question of whether the merger gives rise to public interest concerns in relation to media plurality, Ofcom's report is unambiguous. It concludes, the transaction raises public interest concerns as a result of the risk of increased influence by members of the Murdoch Family Trust over the UK news agenda and the political process, with its unique presence on radio, television, in print and online. We consider that these concerns may justify a reference by the Secretary of State to the Competition and Markets Authority. On the basis of Ofcom's assessment, I confirm that I am minded to refer to a Phase 2 investigation on the grounds of media plurality. The reasoning and evidence on which Ofcom's recommendation is based are persuasive. The proposed entity would have the third largest total reach of any news provider, lower only than the BBC and ITN, and would uniquely span news coverage on television, radio, in newspapers and online. Ofcom's report states that the proposed transaction would give the Murdoch Family Trust material influence over news providers with a significant presence across all key platforms. This potentially raises public interest concerns because, in Ofcom's view, the transaction may increase members of the Murdoch Family Trust's ability to influence the overall news agenda and their ability to influence the political process, and it may also result in the perception of increased influence. These are clear grounds whereby a referral to a Phase 2 investigation is warranted, so that is what I am minded to do. There is, however, a statutory process that I must follow. I am required by legislation to allow the parties the opportunity to make representations to me on this position before I reach a final decision. I will now do that and have given them until Friday the 14th of July to respond. The second question concerns whether, after the merger, the relevant media enterprises would have a genuine commitment to broadcasting standards. Ofcom is unequivocal. It concludes, in light of Fox's and Sky's broadcast compliance records and taking account of our separate assessment of whether Sky remains fit and proper to hold broadcasting licences following the transaction, we do not consider that the merged entity would lack a genuine commitment to the attainment of broadcasting standards. Therefore, we consider that there are no broadcasting standards concerns that may justify a reference by the Secretary of State to the Competition and Markets Authority. Ofcom's approach sought to measure commitment to broadcasting standards by reference to breaches of regulatory codes. It found that Fox's compliance with the UK's broadcasting code is in line with comparable broadcasters. Nor did Fox's compliance record in relation to overseas broadcast jurisdictions, where Ofcom's analysis focused largely on the EU, give cause for concern. I also asked Ofcom to consider the effect of any failure of corporate governance on this public interest consideration. Ofcom did this in the context of its separate assessment of whether Fox and Sky would remain fit and proper to hold broadcast licences following the transaction. It concluded that behaviours alleged at Fox News in the US amount to significant corporate failures. However, these did not, in its view, demonstrate that the merged company would lack a genuine commitment to broadcasting standards. In reaching a view, I have to be guided only by the evidence before me. As such, based on the Ofcom report, I am currently minded not to refer to a Phase 2 investigation in relation to a genuine commitment to broadcasting standards. As required by legislation, I am giving the parties an opportunity to make representations in relation to media plurality grounds, where I am minded to refer for a Phase 2 investigation by the CMA. In the interests of transparency and ensuring all the evidence has been considered, I will also invite wider representations on the question of commitment to broadcasting standards, where I am currently minded not to refer for a Phase 2 investigation. Parties responding to the consultation should not simply duplicate any representations previously made to Ofcom. Instead, responses should be limited to setting out any new and substantial evidence and any comment on Ofcom's overall approach. While there are strong feelings among both supporters and opponents of this merger, in this quasi-judicial process, my decisions can only be influenced by the facts, not opinions, and by the quality of evidence, not who shouts the loudest. The invitation to make representations will open today and close on Friday the 14th of July and can be found on the DCMS website. Under the process set out in the Enterprise Act, it is open to the parties to propose undertakings in lieu of a reference to the CMA for a more detailed investigation. In other words, the parties may seek to avoid a Phase 2 reference by proposing remedies to address the public interest concerns that have provisionally been identified. The decision as to whether or not to accept undertaking in lieu is for the Secretary of State alone. However, and somewhat unusually, the parties proposed a set of undertakings to Ofcom, and Ofcom commented on them in its report. The proposed undertakings centred around Fox maintaining the editorial independence of Sky News by establishing a separate editorial board with a majority of independent members to oversee the appointment of the head of Sky News and any changes to Sky News editorial guidelines. They also include a commitment to maintain Sky branded news for 5 years, with spending at least at similar levels to now. Ofcom's view was that these remedies would mitigate the serious media plurality public interest concerns. They also suggested that the remedies could be further strengthened. The parties last week, without prejudice to my decision today, which they only learned of this morning, formally submitted undertakings in largely the same terms to me. In accordance with the legislation, if I still intend to refer the merger after having considered representations from the party, I am required to consider whether or not these remedies are appropriate. Given the parties have offered these undertakings and Ofcom have commented on them, I have taken an initial view. And I can confirm that I have today written to the parties indicated that I am minded not to accept the undertakings that have been offered. While Ofcom suggests that they may mitigate its concerns, it is for the Secretary of State to decide whether they sufficiently mitigate or ideally fully remedy what are serious public interest considerations. I note that Ofcom's report says we recognise that behavioural undertakings can be difficult to monitor and enforce, and that there are areas in which the proposed undertakings could be strengthened. It cites questions regarding the ongoing arrangements for the appointment of the independent members of the Sky News editorial board and the period of Fox's commitment to maintaining its investment in Sky News. I also note the guidance of the Competition and Markets Authority, which, in the context of competition cases, says that UILs are appropriate where the remedies are clear-cut, effective and capable of ready implementation, and that, in ordinary cases, it is highly unlikely to accept behavioural remedies at Phase 1. I have given the parties 10 working days until Friday the 14th of July to make representations on the minded two decisions I've reached. If I receive further offers of undertakings as part of those representations, I will keep the House informed on how I intend to structure the statutory process I must follow when considering them. As I have set out, I will now take representations on my minded two positions. The call will remain open for 10 working days, and I will then consider the evidence received before coming to a final decision on both grounds. To be clear, the minded two decisions I have outlined today are not my final decisions. A word before I close on Ofcom's fit and proper assessment. As the independent regulator, this is a matter for Ofcom, and my understanding is that they will publish their report today. I have seen the report and know many members in this House will want to comment on it. However, given my current quasi-judicial role in the merger, I will not be commenting on its findings. It is rightly not for government to determine who should and should not hold TV broadcasting licences. Ofcom has an ongoing duty to ensure all UK broadcasters are fit and proper to hold TV broadcasting licences. I am clear that if any evidence comes to light, then it is for Ofcom to take account of that evidence. I trust, as before, that this update is helpful to honourable and right honourable members, and that this statement gives an opportunity to debate this important issue, while at the same time respecting the limits of what I can say, given my ongoing quasi-judicial role in relation to this merger. And I commend this statement to the House.